Good evening, Reston. Welcome to Reston Impact. I'm John Lovis, as usual, your host. This evening, my guest is a very special person. He's not only a good friend, he's also a very special member of our community and has been for some considerable time. He's preparing to leave us after 17 years as the rector of St. Anne's Episcopal Church, right over in Lake Anne. So it's a farewell and a little bit sad for me in that respect, but on the other hand, for him, it's a positive new start. He's going to go off and do something exciting in a new chapter of his life. He's the Reverend Jim Papile, the rector of the St. Anne's Episcopal Church. And what a pleasure to have you here, Jim.
It's great to be here, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you here. How long is it before you actually pull up stakes and leave us, sir?
My last Sunday is May 22nd.
Oh, my goodness.
So we'll have a church picnic after the service, and my wife, Kay, and I will get into our car and drive down to Wilmington, North Carolina that very day, which is where we're going to build a house.
Now, that you say that very day, how long does it take you to get to Wilmington, North Carolina?
About 6.5 hours.
Oh, that's not so bad. You don't say you can't make that. And you're going to build your own house so you have a place to stay before?
We've rented a house, and we've sold our house in Reston. We rented a house in Wilmington, so we'll go down and live there for probably 9 months to a year while we build. And we're very excited about building.
So 9 months to a year. Well, let's get into. We're going to get into this
right.
a little bit,
All right.
a little bit more. For those who still haven't had the pleasure of getting to know you, could you begin by just telling us a little bit about yourself? You know, where were you born? Where do you come from? Where did you go to school? And what path led you to St. Anne's, if you will?
Sure. I claim that I'm a Bostonian, and by birth I am. I was born
Nobody in their right mind would claim
in
it if they weren't, I suppose. You know?
That's probably true. My mom and dad are both from the South Shore of Boston, so they both grew up there. But my father joined the military in World War II and continued to be an Army officer after the war. And so I really grew up all over the place. I started school in France, first and second grade, came to the States and went to many schools in many different places, East Coast, West Coast.
Did you tell me you went to high school? We were talking before we came on the air. You went to high school in Heidelberg, Germany?
And I finished high school in Germany. That's right, American
God,
High
what
School
a
in
beautiful place to
Heidelberg.
have done that.
It was really wonderful to do that. Yeah, it's set my appetite for travel ever since. So travel's been a big part of my life.
I can imagine that. Okay, and from Heidelberg, you came back to the
United States
United
to
States.
play football at the University of New Hampshire in
Really?
New Hampshire. Yeah.
And what position did you? You were a lineman, or you?
I was indeed. I was a defensive end. I did that for a year, and found that really wasn't my cup of tea anymore, and became a carpenter, and lived in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and actually lived on a farm with anywhere from 7 to 10 other people, as we rehabilitated an old farm in Jackson, New Hampshire. So for 3
It's
years.
interesting. You come out of Boston, your dad's career military, and you end up in New Hampshire on a farm.
Yeah.
Had he ever been on a farm? Who knows?
No.
Okay, so what a
No.
great adventure that must have been.
These are just young people at the time that I had met
Right.
when I was in college, and I got very interested in carpentry work, and that was a place where I could be a carpenter.
That's
And
interesting.
I guess it was a commune of some sorts. We
This
had
was- what
animals.
years are we
and
talking
this
about
is 1970, 71, 72.
Oh man, there could have been any number of things.
So this
back
was
then,
back
yeah.
to the earth kind
There
of
you
a
go.
movement.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you ended up somehow in Alexandria.
My interest in carpentry brought me to Virginia, where there are many old communities like Old Town Alexandria,
Right.
Mount Vernon, where they do specialized carpentry on colonial homes. And I found work in Old Town Alexandria, doing work restoring some colonial homes in Old Town. And met my wife, Kay, and we started a business in 1978, 79.
Construction contract, you say, yeah?
And we
Okay.
did that for 10 years. And then I went to seminary right there in Alexandria.
And one morning you woke up and there was a bolt out of the blue, or what?
I got sick, John, working in all those old houses and tearing down the old walls. And I got a severe allergy to dust and to wood dust. And I
Probably
couldn't
could have been a lot
continue.
worse. If you asbestos, for example, wood dust is probably good for you relatively.
Well,
at any rate.
It created problems for my
Wow.
lungs, and I couldn't be a carpenter anymore. And I had this nudge, to go to seminary. Somebody was calling, somebody from upstairs was calling. And we decided it was time for me to go ahead and take the plunge, go to seminary, and become an Episcopal priest. And that's what happened.
My goodness, just out of the blue. And that was 20-some years ago, you told me.
Yeah, I went to seminary in 1988.
Okay.
We had 5 children at the time, and it was quite a step. Quite a step for my family to send me off back to school.
Wow, yeah. I think your wife gets a medal somewhere here.
She's the hero of the story,
somewhere
John.
here in this mix. I think your wife deserves a medal.
She brags. She had 4 of her children, me included, 3 kids and me, all in upper education at the same time. She had 3 kids in college and me in seminary all at the same time.
My goodness, what
Yeah.
a marvelous woman she must be.
Yep.
And you said the first couple you served for, let's see, some period of time in Falls Church, you mentioned?
Well, I worked in Alexandria, right across from the seminary, at a church called Emmanuel Church on the Hill, for 3 years. And then I was called to a little congregation in Falls Church that I worked with a Vietnamese priest. There was only one Episcopal Vietnamese priest on the East Coast.
Really?
And he and I started a multicultural parish. We called it the Anglo-Vietnamese Episcopal Church. It was called St. Patrick's. And at the time, there was a large number of immigrants coming from Vietnam, and we helped
Late
resettle.
70s.
Yeah, no, this is in the 90s.
90s, okay.
And it was
It's still
that
coming.
second wave.
Okay.
What was happening is that men were getting out of these re-education camps, and being sent to the United States. And we had called the HO program. We had a special immigration program, bringing in many of these families. And many of these men had been in re-education camps, really in prison camps,
Under the
for
communist
many
regime
years.
in Vietnam at the time.
And they needed help getting resettled. And I spent 7 years with this wonderful priest, and we resettled many Vietnamese families in that Falls Church, Arlington, that Route 50 corridor, where many Vietnamese folks are
Now,
resettled.
you refer to yourself as a priest, an Episcopalian
Episcopal priest,
I
that's
grew up Catholic, so
Yeah.
I'd never recognized priests anywhere else except the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But I guess they have. So
Yeah. Well, teach us out.
I'm already learning a lot. Okay, so you came here about 17 years ago.
1999, September 1999.
So that would be 17 years ago. Okay, and you and I first met, it wasn't too long after you got here, I guess, and first met in 2001, I think it was. The United States was involved in a run-up to what would turn out to be a war after the tragedy of 9/11.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of working together with some of the finest people I would meet in Reston, the leaders of the Reston faith community. And I'm not one who, since my childhood, has really been around churches a great deal, let's say. But I found a whole cohort of people that I was so impressed with, and at the time we were mutually engaged in this idea of trying to sort of put ourselves on the tracks or whatever, and try to stop the country from going to war, and it seemed feasible at the time. But your St. Anne's, Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation, the Adams Center, UCP, the United Christian Parish. Most of the churches, it seemed like, in the Reston area were engaged with us, sponsoring community conversations, discussions, and yes, candlelight vigils. That's my recollection of one of the things we tried to do, and got a pretty good participation. I mean, hundreds of people participated here.
Very
in the Reston.
meaningful, I thought.
In the Reston area, there was a great deal of a rising up of people to do it. And actually, it turned out that we were part of something that was really much larger across the region and across the country. Millions of people were trying to do the same thing. But in the final analysis, I guess we failed.
Yeah.
The next thing we knew, we were off into Iraq.
Yeah. And we're still reaping the whirlwind after
I shouldn't talk
all
about
that.
it totally in the past tense, should I?
Yeah, no.
15 years later, we're still involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, and
It's taken a toll on our country.
and it's taken
Human,
a real toll.
financial,
Psychological.
Yep.
I think we're probably seeing part of that in this current election campaign. One of the events, and I have to talk about this.
Sure.
This was really something, and for those of you who've been here any time, you may actually remember this event. an event that occurred right here in St. Anne's, in your church. You
Yeah.
hosted it that evening,
Yeah.
I recall. We had close to 100 people from the community, from many faiths, gathered in your sanctuary at St. Anne's. Congressman Jim Moran came and spoke about our efforts and the prospects for a war that he too very much opposed. In an exchange, and this is my recollection, and I'm going to have to get some help from you here because I remember parts of it. When we were coming over here today, we talked about it, and you partly are able to remember this in this way, and then I remember a little differently, and then over here I remember a piece of this. Maybe in our advanced years, let's see what happens if we put it together. If we put it together, it's all there. Jim Moran, in an exchange with a Jewish woman in the audience, he made some remarks which I thought were interesting at the time, but oh my goodness, they reverberated around the community, around the state, around the country, and cost him dearly politically. He lost seniority on committees, etc., because of the events that occurred in your church. Could you please tell me what your recollection is of what he said and what you understood it to mean at the time?
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to say, John, is that you may not remember, but you and I cooked this whole thing up together. It was you that said, maybe we could do this at St. Anne's, and I was only too happy. You don't remember that, do you? I was only too happy to comply. It's
I remember being a co-conspirator.
Not that you had to twist my arm or anything, but we were very happy to be able to host this meeting, and it was a very informal meeting with Congressman Moran. It was not a planned speech. It wasn't a stump sort of a thing.
No.
And much of it was questions and answers, and people were asking him all sorts of meaningful questions.
Yeah.
And there was one woman who said, and I think you and I can both agree, she said something like, if the Jewish leadership had been against this war, do you think that would have made a difference? And very thoughtfully, Congressman Moran said, yes, probably that would have made a difference. But what was reported from the back of the room, and I'm not sure where the reporter, it was a local newspaper, but what came out in the local newspaper the next day or 2 days after was that what Congressman Moran said was that it was the Jewish leadership in the government that had caused the war.
Yeah.
And boy, that was certainly not what he said at all.
I have a slightly different recollection of his saying something that, and it was in response to, it was part of a conversation he was having with this woman who I knew, and her name now escapes me.
Yeah.
And who wasn't at all upset or taken aback by anything the congressman said. Was more like, indeed, he did think that if leaders in the Jewish community got together and were to make a strong statement on this, that it could have a very helpful effect in perhaps steering us away from war, or something to that effect.
Right.
Not that they had caused it or anything of the sort. He did not say.
No, but that was what was reported.
And then it grew as it went. And then
an op-ed writer, and I can't remember the gentleman's name.
At least one. I think there may have been two. You think it was Cortland Malloy. I think it was Charles Krauthammer.
He called me up and said, will you comment on this? And I told him what I knew of the incident as it happened, thinking that he could help us clear the air. And the next Saturday in the Washington Post, there was an article that mentioned me by name and said something to the effect that, how dare you, a religious person, a minister in a local church, allow this kind of anti-Semitic rhetoric to happen in your presence? Why didn't you do something at that time?
I was appalled by that. It was like, one, you were guilty of letting these people into the church to talk, and two, that you let this kind of talk go on. It was like, it was like,
that I didn't say something afterwards in defense of.
Well, he treated you as though you had said it. The whole thing, was right, and you had, other than providing a sanctuary for people to have a conversation. That was my recollection of your role, but. Yeah, it ripped you.
It was very painful.
Yeah,
it was painful because many of my friends,
many of my rabbi and
Jewish friends, called me up afterwards and said, "What the heck was that all about? What did you do?" Right. And I think that there was some feelings of betrayal by some people. How could you let this happen? I didn't think this was you. And
of course it wasn't.
I couldn't defend myself because it was there in print. And there are some of those individuals that I have never been able to reconnect with. Some certainly have understood, but it was very painful, and it taught me a lesson.
It's too bad they didn't have a conversation with some of the folks in their congregation who actually were in the church that evening.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It taught me a lesson about the press. Unfortunate lesson about the press.
Yeah, and you mentioned to me that you had asked the reporter when he called if he'd let you know what he was going to write, and not to worry.
And I never heard from him again except for in print on that Saturday morning.
And you did indeed hear from him. What an experience. Anyway, I thought it was Charles Grodhammer. Maybe it's because I have such a low opinion of him that I thought he would be the kind of guy to do that kind of thing. I didn't generally have that bad an opinion of Cortland Malloy, both of whom I've read for some time. Other than that occurrence, which is unfortunate in a couple of respects. One, it was unfair to you, but the other thing is that it hides the fact that you were one of a group of people from the clergy who were trying to do something to keep peace at a very bad time for our country. I mean, the highest of motives, and working very hard to do that. And this is here. Thank you for your efforts, kind of thing.
Well, one of the things that came to me from that was how proud I was both of my community, my greater community, Reston, and my own church family, my community at St. Anne's, that people would take risks, that this was, if it indeed proved to be a risky moment in our corporate experience, this place, Reston, and my church are willing to take risks for good causes, and I've been very proud of that since I came here, and have continued to be proud of both this town that I love so, and also my church, because they're willing to stand up. And there are values here that are explicit, and that there are people here willing to stand up for those values.
For me, it was like I said, I discovered something I hadn't realized. I'd been part of the Reston community, a community activist, if you will, for some time. But I'd really never tapped into the vein that we're the faith community. But I just met these wonderful people, and several congregations, in fact, their members were willing to stand up and do the right thing and step forward and have these vigils and speak publicly. And like you, I couldn't agree more. I was so proud of our community for being willing to do so. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out our way in the end. But
well, we're still fighting. I mean, there are still housing, like fair housing. We're still struggling to make sure that as this community is in transition, that there are adequate housing for people who work here. As Bob Simon once said, to work here and to live here and to play here. And then there are those in this community with not the highest paying jobs in the world, people who do service jobs, that we do the best to try to make sure that there are places for them to live.
People we all know
here
and
in
see
our
on a regular basis, and this kind of
Absolutely.
thing, and they have some issues to deal with.
Absolutely.
And this gentleman has been a spokesman for social justice causes, including affordable housing, and I know the church has played an important role. I remember several walks for the homeless that ended up at St. Anne's, as I recall, under your leadership.
And our community has had a legacy. Our first rector, Embry Rucker, the homeless shelter is named after Embry Rucker, and he was the first Episcopal priest in this town.
Now, I had lost sight of that. I know the legend of Embry, but I didn't know him at all. And I lost the connection to the Episcopal Church.
And then that's the legacy that we have here, and the legacy with the plaza and with the formation of Reston as it is today. That Embry Rucker worked so hard to keep social services.
Mentioning the plaza, the Baptist Church on the plaza also was a very key player in the role of trying to push back the war, if you will. You're getting ready to leave now, and as you leave, it's the role of minister, rector, pastor. You have to give people, succor and relief, who are going through all kinds of difficult things, the death of a loved one, suffering in terminal phase of life, and this kind of thing. What are some of the high points that will always be with you, besides the one we've just talked about, your time here in Reston, Jim?
Well, I think a seminal moment for me and for Reston was 9/11, and that morning I was in a meeting at church, and I was called out of that meeting by Reston Hospital, and some staff members asked me to come over and to provide pastoral care for the people in the hospital, because there was quite a bit of concern at Reston Hospital about after the tragedies had happened. So I spent most of that morning and early afternoon praying with and talking to nurses and people in waiting rooms. And I remember one man being prepped for an operation, just simply took an IV out of his arm and said, "I'm going home." And
because
off the
the
gurney
impact
and
of the
walked
9/11,
home.
what was happening
Yeah.
with the planes flying
Yeah.
into buildings, and oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
So we'd stand in front of
Oh
a
my
nurse's
goodness.
station, and we'd hold hands and say prayers. And at that time, John, the hospital was on alert. We weren't sure how many hospitals were going to be needed to tend to those who had been injured and where they might have been injured. So the hospital was on high alert.
Not to forget all the uncertainty that was created by those events that we didn't know for a couple of days. Everybody's waiting for other shoes to fall and other terrible things possibly to happen.
But that gave me the impetus to put out to the public that we would have a prayer meeting and a chance to gather at 5 o'clock that afternoon at St. Anne's. And there wasn't enough room for everybody that showed up. I mean, we had people come from all over the community and all sorts of faiths and all sorts of, and we gave people a chance to speak and to pray and it was really a very moving moment for me. And I think for my congregation as well, because we opened the doors to the larger community and people who were in need came in. And that was a very, very powerful moment for me, and I think for my ministry as well.
What was the toughest thing you experienced, Jim, in your resting time?
Well, there have been, as you said, those pastoral moments, but any minister, any pastor will tell you that that burying young people, burying children, being there for families who have lost young loved ones is probably the hardest thing in the world to do. And a congregation the size of mine, with 450, 500 families, you're bound to have that kind of moments.
Yeah,
and I think that it's those personal moments that are the hardest.
I guess that, when I think about it, and I've told my own experiences with friends of mine who've lost very young ones, including newborns, I guess really rock me, because it does. It's the kind of thing that you take in and you say, "Oh my God, what would I start imagining? What if that were to happen?"
Yeah.
With one of my young ones, because
Yeah.
the young ones are not supposed to predecease you. That's not the way it's supposed to work. It's
Yeah.
too horrible to contemplate.
Yeah.
Well,
One of my proudest moments is that we've developed a memorial garden for the internment of cremains, of ashes, at St. Anne's. It was part of the original plan, and we've been able to do that. So as you probably know, there is not a cemetery. When Bob Simon developed Reston, he did not develop it with a cemetery in mind, and we do have a memorial garden, and so we have offered to the community access to the loved ones' cremains, the loved ones' ashes to be interred directly into the ground.
Are they called cremains?
We call them cremains, yeah.
You're seeing a bit of a smile here. Part of it's, I'm just finishing reading the book in his own words, written by Bob Simon with Christine Alcorn. She's the author
I didn't know
of
about
this
this book.
And in there, I had never heard this before, but he explains in there why we didn't have a cemetery. He didn't like anything associated with the burial business.
Yep.
It turns out he was very opposed to it, so he refused. He took it off the plan.
Yep.
It was supposed to be one over by Lake Fairfax.
Yep.
And Bob took it off the plan. Anyway, listen, I can't, I'll tell you what a pleasure it is for me to have you here today. What a pleasure it is to have known you, and how much I wish you all the best. Although I cannot imagine going and building my own house, especially at a time, when you have presumably earned some relaxation. It doesn't sound relaxing.
Well, after shepherding a flock here in this amazing, energetic community for 17 years, believe it or not, building a house sounds like a vacation to me. So looking forward to it. Although I have to tell you, and I speak for my wife and myself both, that leaving Reston is heavy on our hearts, because we can't imagine a community that's as active and as loving and has been involved as this one has been. It's been a real blessing for us to live in this place for 17. And we will take much of what we have gained here with us, and hope we'll leave a little bit behind too.
Indeed you will. I'm going to say, one of the things that makes this a special place is having people like yourself.
Thank you, John.
Good sir. I wish you all the well in your retirement. These are the fun shows to do. Thank you, Jim,
You're
for
welcome.
joining us
Thank
tonight. Thanks, Dan and Ruben and company for helping us bring you this program through Comcast. And thanks most of all to you, our viewers, for sharing some of your time with us this evening. We'll see you next time on Reston Impact.